In this Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about the Technocyte Coda, aka the Infested Liches, where to unlock them, how to farm them as fast as possible, and how you can get those very powerful Coda Weapons for yourself. Big shout out to all the generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's hunt some liches, shall we? First of all though, the most important question, why hunt Coda Liches in the first place? What do you get out of it? Well, first of all, and most obviously, of course, the Coda Weapons, which are on the one hand 10 subvariants of pre-existing infested weapons, which are much stronger, plus 3 completely new ones in the form of the Coda Basilisk, the Dual Toxica, and the Coda Motivore. If you want to get your hands on these very strong weapons, then you have to fight these infested liches in order to gain access to them. On top of this, there are also a plethora of very cool ephemeras that you can get from the Coda as well, plus a handful of emotes, floofs, and posters to decorate your orbiter. So let's talk about how we can hunt those liches down. First things first, let's start with step 1, that'll be creating the Coda Lich in the first place. How do you do that? See, in order to get access to the Coda system in the first place, you have to have Warframe 1999 unlocked, because that is where the whole thing takes place. Also, if you want to generate a Technocyte Coda for yourself, then you can't have an already existing Kuva Lich or Sister of Pavos. You need to beat them first in order to be able to create a Coda Lich. Then, all you gotta do is run a tech rot mission of your choice. I personally prefer the survival. You take out a bunch of enemies, and then at some point, one of these foes will drop a mixtape. What you want to do now is pick up that mixtape and go over to a console that will then create this hacking minigame, which you don't even have to succeed. You can instantly fail it by directing your little worm into a wall, and once you've failed that hacking process, your Technocyte Coda will be generated. You can just abort the mission, you don't even need to finish it, and after you're back to your orbiter, you will be introduced to your personal infested boy band. Just one important thing to note here, unlike Sisters of Pavos and Kuva Liches, Technocyte Coda don't generate with an already determined Coda weapon, and also the Warframe with which you do this doesn't matter at all because the elemental progenitor also has nothing to do with the Warframe, unlike for the Kuva Liches and Sisters of Pavos. Don't worry, we're gonna talk about how to get your weapon of choice with your element of choice later in the video. Now, up next, we should technically talk about how to actually hunt down those Coda Liches to get the rewards. However, before we get into the hunting process itself, first of all, we need to talk about 2 different categories of mods which are very important and essential in order to be able to do that. What I'm talking about here are the 8 antivirus and the 5 potency mods. See, once we generated our Technocyte Coda, we can enter this overview screen right here where we get a couple more details, but most importantly, a cleansing progress bar, which we want to get to 100% as fast as possible. How do we do that? Well, it's relatively similar to the normal Lich system, where you have to wait for your boy band members to visit you in your mission and then hit them with your Parazon. That will give you more cleansing progress. But unfortunately, it's not all that simple. In order for your Parazon hit to register in the first place and give you cleansing progress, you will need these aforementioned antivirus and potency mods. So let's quickly talk about how to get them in the first place. Well, first of all, for the potency mods, these are relatively simple. All you gotta do is take out tech rot enemies. After a couple of missions, you're gonna be swimming in those. They are really not the big problem. What is more important though are the 8 antivirus mods, and they're a little bit tougher to come by. The main way you get them is from Helvania bounties in the reward pool. However, you can also transmute one from 4 other antivirus mods, trade them with other players, and there's also a pack that you can buy from the market. Costs 100 platinum. If you want to skip the grind, that would also be an option, although I would rather recommend just do the Helvania bounties. But now that you have a copy of all 8 antivirus mods and the 5 potency mods, how does this whole modding thing work in the first place? See, as we initially said, when your boy band members visit you in your mission, you need to shoot down their health bar and then attempt a Parazon finisher on them. In order for that finisher to actually register and give your cleansing process, you will have to have the right one out of the antivirus mods on your Parazon. Yes, that's right, just one. In contrast to the Kuva Liches and Sisters of Pavos, you don't have to get all 3 right and you don't have to have them in the right order. The Coda system is much simpler. You just have to have the one right mod on it, and that is all. One hit with the right antivirus mod will give you 5% cleansing progress, which is not a lot, and that is exactly where the potency mods come in. See, since you only need one antivirus mod on your Parazon, that leaves 2 mod slots open that you can fill with the potency mods, which will give you bonus cleansing progress, which makes the whole thing much easier. Now, you might think that's all nice and well, but how am I even going to find out in the first place which one out of the 8 antivirus mods is the right one? So let's talk about that in the next chapter. Before that, however, if you could give the video a quick like, that'd be super nice because it always helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm. Cheers so much for your support. Alright, we just talked about how to create your infested Coda Lich in the first place, how to get your hands on the mods that you need for the Lich hunting and how that works. So now we can get to the main meat of the video. How does the whole Technocyte Coda hunt work start to finish? That's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. See, the first step, of course, as we said, is generate your Technocyte Coda in the first place, as we explained in a previous chapter. The next step would be to find out which one out of the 8 antivirus mods is the right one, and the fastest way to find out is to just put 3 random ones on your Parazon and play one of the Coda missions. You can identify them on the Helvania mission screen by the icons with the tentacles around them, and then once your boy band members spawn, you just attempt to hit them with the Parazon and see what happens. If the Parazon hit fails, that means the 3 mods you chose are definitely wrong, so you go back to the drawing board and try 3 other ones. But if the hit succeeds, then you have successfully found out which one of these antivirus mods is the correct one. Once you've found out which one is the right, you also go back to your Parazon modding screen and throw out the 2 other ones that you don't need anymore, which will then open up, as we previously mentioned, 2 more mod slots which you're going to fill with the potency mods in order to drive forward your cleansing progress, and here is how you do that most efficiently. See, after the first hit, with which you found out which antivirus mod is the right one, you will have a total of 5% cleansing progress now. What you want to do for the next 2 hits is pick the 2 potency mods that both give you plus 15 extra progress, so that the next 2 hits will both give you 35% each, which will then end you up with a total of 75% progress after these 2 hits. What you want to do then is replace the 2 15% potency mods with 2 10% potency mods, because that will be enough for the last hit then. And the best ones to pick here would be Quick Correct, which has a 10% chance to drop a life heart cell, and Turbo Protect, which has a 25% chance to give you an additional antivirus mod. Yes, of course, these chances are still low, but if you get lucky, then the last hit is going to give you a nice extra reward. Just one important thing to keep in mind here is, while the antivirus mod only uses one of its 3 charges after you successfully eliminated the entire Lich, the potency mods will lose a charge with every single Parazon hit that you do. So make sure to keep an eye on their durability, and also another tip, while you're doing the Coda missions to drive forward your cleansing progress, ideally you want to do that in a multiplayer lobby with other players, because every time their boy band members spawn in and they get a successful hit on them, you will also benefit with another 5% extra cleansing progress for your personal Lich. But alright, you now have successfully gotten 100% progress. What happens next? See, once you reach 100%, you have unlocked the final showdown against your personal boy band. This one happens in Railjack, just like with the other Liches too, in Earth Proxima, but luckily this one is much easier on the Railjack part. The way this works is very easy. There is a ginormous floating speaker in the orbit that you're gonna fly towards with your Railjack, and on the way there, your Railjack is gonna be boarded by tech rot enemies. Take all the enemies on board out, take the cysts out that grow on board too, and then you can shoot the speaker with your Railjack. Repeat that whole process then for the second speaker, and you'll be able to enter the big floating stadium to fight your personal Coda. In contrast to the Corpus and the Grineer Liches, with the Technocyte Coda, there's no actual ship-to-ship combat in the Railjack mission, so you luckily don't even need to have a good Railjack in the first place. Now, for the final showdown, this is actually a pretty cool boss fight where you fight little minions while at the same time having to dodge attacks that are coming from the stage in form of the stage lights as well as the pyrotechnics, and once you've fought yourself through the waves of small enemies, your boy band is gonna come off stage where you can actually go and fight them. Once you've succeeded, just like with other Liches too, you have the choice of either vanquishing them, take them out, or you can convert them, to use them as your Railjack crew, just like with the Grenier and Corpus versions as well. If you want to have the cool Coda Weapons though, you gotta vanquish them. And that would already be it with the entire hunt. Up next, I also want to quickly talk about the rewards in more detail. Before we do that though, a couple suggestions from my side in case you're having trouble with that final boss fight. First of all, one thing to keep in mind is that the enemies in the boss fight can deal toxin damage. So if you have a purely shield-based frame, that can be pretty painful. I personally would recommend going in there with either a health tank or a Warframe that gets their survivability directly from abilities. Also, before you go into the fight, make sure to pay attention to your Lich overview screen where it shows you which damage type they're actually weak against, so make sure to put whatever that is on your weapon to get extra damage. You want to make sure to come in with as much direct damage as possible. And if all of that still doesn't help, then what you can always do is go in with a public lobby and have other Tenno help you out. That usually seals the deal then. But before we end the video, let's also talk in a little more detail about the rewards and how exactly the Coda weapon system works. As we initially said, of course there are also cosmetics involved, like ephemeras, floofs, or dancing animations, but the main reason you're probably doing the whole thing is for the Technocyte Coda Weapons. And unlike Kuva Liches and Sisters of Pavos, you don't directly get the weapon from the Lich itself, but instead, the way it works here is, defeating your Technocyte Coda will give you between 10 and 15 of a resource called Life Heart Cells. These are what you're going to use to exchange for your Coda weapon of choice, which, by the way, is also the reason why we definitely want to make sure, with our last Parazon hit, to use the Quick Correct Potency mod, because that gives us a 10% chance of getting an extra one of these, which is huge. But now, once you have the Life Heart Cells, you're going to go into the Helvenia Mall and talk to Eleanor, who is the one that sells the Coda weapons. Unfortunately, in her shop, you will not have access to all 13 of them all the time. The shop inventory rotates, and double unfortunately, you also don't get to choose which progenitor element is on your Coda weapon of choice, and also the percentage is completely random. So here's my personal tip on how to go about it. First of all, technically it doesn't really matter which progenitor element is on the weapons, because there is an item called Elemental Vice in the game, with which you can change the progenitor element, not only of the Coda weapons, but also of the Kuva and Tenet weapons, to whichever one you like. This Elemental Vice can also be acquired from Eleanor in exchange for 50,000 standing with the Hex once you reach rank 5 with them. You can also get it as a drop from Temporal Archimedia, or buy it for 20 platinum in the market once you have the Hex quest completed. So ideally, what we're looking for here is not the right element, but just a high percentage of damage. On the other hand, if your weapon of choice is only available with a very low damage percentage, then you might want to wait for the next shop rotation and maybe see if you can snipe a better version later down the line. Depends on how patient you are. But even if you get one with a low damage percentage, just like with the Kuva and the Tenet weapons, also of course with the Coda weapons, you can use the Valence transformation, where if you have 2 copies of the same weapon, you can fuse them into each other to get to the maximum of 60% step by step this way. It's definitely more grind, that's why I personally prefer to wait for a 60% variant before I make the purchase. And if you also want a full tier list of all Coda weapons in the game, I'm gonna make one very soon, so if you don't want to miss that day 1, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. Welcome to the crew! Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nos Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Undercanio2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Antares, Patricrator, Trolloloxen, Boomia1, Mr. Games Plays, Zave, Awindai, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.